They called the cops on me for launching my boat on my lake, but 10 minutes later, I controlled their marina. The sun was setting, and I was on my boat, ready to finally enjoy the lake that was mine. But the HOA had other plans. Just as I pushed off the dock, I saw her, the HOA president, glaring from her porch, with that smug smile she always wears. But she had no idea the storm I was about to cause. And then the sirens. I thought I was done for. But 10 minutes later, everything changed. You won't believe how I turned the tables. Welcome to HOA Unit, the place where things aren't always as they seem. I'm Mark, and I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the HOA thinks they run the show. But, well, sometimes they forget who's really in charge. I'm just your average guy. But today, I've got a story that'll change how you think about power, revenge, and justice in these cookie-cutter neighborhoods. So, sit tight, because this story's gonna take some unexpected turns. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Let's dive in. The sun was high in the sky as I stood on the dock, my feet pressed against the familiar wood, worn smooth by years of use. The kind of wood that creaked under the slightest shift, like it was telling you stories of all the things it had seen. I was excited. More than excited, actually. It felt like a victory. My boat was ready, just waiting for me to launch it into the calm waters of my lake. But then again, it was always my lake, wasn't it? I had spent months getting everything just right. The boat, the lake, the weather. Perfect. There was something peaceful about the lake, something that made all the chaos of life feel distant. I had worked hard for this. The HOA had no right to tell me what I could and couldn't do on my property, especially on Make's own damn lake. As I tightened the knot on the boat's rope and prepared to push it out, I couldn't help but feel that sense of calm wash over me. Until I saw her. There she was, the HOA president, standing on her porch, arms crossed, that smug look plastered across her face. Her eyes narrowed like she already knew what I was about to do, but didn't know how to stop it. I ignored her at first. I had my boat to focus on, but I could feel her eyes drilling into my back, and something told me that this wasn't going to be as simple as it seemed. She was watching me, waiting for me to do something, or maybe hoping I'd mess up so she could pounce on me with all the rules and fines she loved so much. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Not today. The water was still, calm, almost like it was waiting too. The only sound was the soft lapping of waves against the dock and my own breath. I looked at the boat again, then at the water, then back at her. Her eyes locked on mine, and I could feel the tension already building between us. I untied the rope and let it fall into the boat. Slowly I climbed in, trying to ignore the heat of her stare, the way she made everything feel like a test. Her mouth opened, like she was about to say something, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of hearing it. I pulled the engine's cord and watched as the motor sputtered to life. And then I pushed off the dock. At first, it was just the hum of the engine, the vibrations in my bones, and the smell of the fresh lake air. The calm, peaceful moment I had been craving. But as soon as the boat started to move, I knew something was off. I could feel her eyes on me, watching, waiting. There was something about the way she stood there, so stiff and full of judgment, like she was a hawk waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I told myself I was overthinking it, but the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. I kept my focus on the water, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. I was doing nothing wrong, wasn't I? As I steered the boat, I could see the ripples forming behind me, slowly spreading out. a perfect reflection of the clear blue sky. Everything was so still, so perfect. But then, just as I thought I was free and clear, I heard the faintest sound in the distance. Sirens. I frowned, not sure if I was hearing things. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, messing with my nerves. But no, the sirens grew louder, closer. I turned my head, half expecting to see something like a fire truck or ambulance speeding down the road. But no, I saw the flashing lights. And the worst part? They were headed right for the dock. My stomach dropped. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't know what was happening, but something told me that the moment I saw those lights, it was too late to turn back. I didn't panic, though. Not yet. I kept the boat steady, even as the sirens grew louder. I glanced back at the dock and saw her. She was already there, on the phone, probably calling the cops. The same woman who had made my life a living hell with her petty rules and relentless fines. Now she was calling the police because I was enjoying the very thing I had every right to enjoy. I wasn't sure if I should laugh or scream. Was this really happening? Was this woman so obsessed with power that she would call the cops on me for using my own lake? I felt a strange sense of calm as the boat bobbed gently in the water. And then, just as I was starting to convince myself it wasn't that big of a deal, a patrol car pulled up to the dock. The officer stepped out, looked around, and then gave me a blank stare. I was just trying to enjoy my damn day. And now I had to deal with this? The worst part? I had no idea how far she was willing to go to ruin my peaceful afternoon. I had a feeling she would stop at nothing. But I wasn't going down without a fight. I knew this was just the beginning. And whatever happened next, I wasn't going to let her win, not without a plan. So, here's the big question. The officer's boots made a soft thud against the dock as he slowly approached. I kept my eyes on him, still gripping the steering wheel of the boat. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The water seemed to be holding its breath, just as I was. The officer looked around, then back at me. His face was hard to read. Not unfriendly, just neutral. I knew he wasn't here to make friends, but his presence didn't feel like the end of the world either. Maybe this would be a quick misunderstanding. Maybe they just needed to confirm that I wasn't some criminal launching boats illegally. But then I saw her, the HOA president, standing at the edge of the dock, her arms crossed, her eyes gleaming with a sense of smug satisfaction. She didn't even look worried. As if this was some grand victory in her life, the moment she finally got me, caught me, nailed me down. She opened her mouth to speak, and I could already guess what was coming. She was ready to play the role of the perfect suburban snitch. "He's breaking the rules," she would say. "This isn't allowed." The officer turned his head towards her, his eyes scanning her for any sign of genuine concern. But she didn't seem nervous. She wasn't looking for answers. She wasn't here to help. No, she was just here to watch. "Sir, we have a situation here," she said, her voice sharp and filled with authority, as if she was some kind of judge or ruler of the entire neighborhood. "This man is launching his boat without permission. He's violating the HOA rules. He's not allowed to use the lake like this." I almost wanted to laugh. Here I was, a grown man, being treated like a child over a boat ride on a lake that I owned. But I didn't laugh. Instead, I kept my face neutral, my gaze steady. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. The officer didn't respond immediately. He was still studying the situation, sizing up the scene. I could see that in his eyes. He wasn't buying it, not yet. And that gave me a little hope. Maybe this wasn't going to be as bad as it felt. "Is there any law against what I'm doing?" I asked, my voice calm, maybe too calm. I was trying to sound reasonable, like I wasn't some rogue rebel fighting an HOA president. I wanted to be the sane one in this crazy situation. The officer glanced at me, then at her. Well, not exactly. It's just that you're breaking HOA rules. His voice trailed off, like he wasn't even sure what the rules were himself. He was just the messenger. I wasn't the criminal here. But then she spoke again, her voice so sweet, too sweet, almost as if she was enjoying every second of this. He's disrupting the peace of the neighborhood, officer. He's flaunting the rules, flaunting his disregard for the community's standards. It was almost poetic how she said it, as if she believed her own words, as if she was right, justified. Maybe she truly thought she was saving the neighborhood from the big bad boat owner. I let out a breath, the air around me feeling colder than before. It was now or never, and I wasn't about to back down. Well, if we're talking about rules, I started, slowly raising my hand toward the marina, the one that had always been under their control. What about the marina over there? You know, the one you've been running for years? How many rules have you broken in your little empire? Her smile faltered for just a second, but I saw it. I saw the crack. She wasn't so sure of herself anymore. The officer looked at the marina, then back at her, and I could feel the shift in the air. I could feel the tension building, like a pressure cooker, just waiting for the lid to blow off. She didn't like that question. It wasn't part of the script she had written for me. She tried to recover quickly, but I wasn't finished. You see, I've done my research, I continued, my voice steady and sharp now. I know everything about that marina. I know the way it's been managed, and how much it's cost the neighborhood. Maybe you're not the right person to be making these decisions anymore. She froze, her lips pressing tightly together. The smugness had disappeared, replaced with something I couldn't quite read. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was panic. Either way, I had her off balance now. The officer looked from one of us to the other, clearly unsure about what was going on. But it was clear to him now that there was more to this story than he had been led to believe. "Ma'am," he said, turning to her, "is that true?" She hesitated, just for a moment, and I could tell it was eating her alive inside. She was used to being in control, used to pulling the strings. Now, for the first time, someone was asking the questions she didn't have answers to, but she quickly masked it with that same fake smile. "What he's saying is irrelevant," she snapped. "He's still violating the HOA rules, and that's what matters. The police need to do their job." But the officer didn't move. He stayed there, looking at her, studying her. And in that moment, I knew I had one thing going for me, the truth. He didn't say anything for a long while. The silence hung between us, thick and heavy. I could see the wheels turning in his head, and I knew the longer this went on, the more he was starting to question her version of events. Finally, he spoke. "I think I need to see some paperwork," he said, his voice firm now. "I need to know what exactly the rules are here, and what legal backing you have to make these claims." She didn't expect that. Not at all. I was watching her closely now, waiting for her to crack, to lose that perfect facade. But she didn't crack. She just gave him a tight-lipped smile and turned to walk back to her house. She was going to try to get the paperwork. But deep down, I knew she didn't have anything solid. She was bluffing, and I was ready to call her out on it. Now, the officer and I were left standing on the dock, looking at each other. The silence between us was unsettling. I couldn't help but think, was this really happening? Was this woman truly willing to put her entire HOA empire at risk, just to stop me from enjoying a boat ride? But then, I had another thought. What if this wasn't just about the boat? What if there was something more to this, something bigger than a petty fight over rules? I looked at the officer, feeling the weight of the moment. "What do you think?" I asked him. The officer stood there, his gaze shifting between me and the slowly retreating figure of the HOA president. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel it in my bones. He didn't move for what felt like an eternity, and I couldn't blame him. He was caught in the middle of something that didn't seem to make much sense, something that had spiraled far beyond what he expected when he first arrived. I could hear the quiet hum of the boat engine behind me, the only sound in the otherwise peaceful lake, except for the occasional bird call. But it wasn't peaceful. Not anymore. The officer took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving me. "So," he began, his voice cautious, "you're saying that you've been having problems with the HOA?" I didn't know how to answer. Should I lay it all out for him? Should I explain the petty rule enforcement, the fines for the tiniest things like the color of my mailbox, the grass height? Or should I just focus on the fact that this whole thing was about me simply wanting to enjoy my boat ride on my own lake? I took a deep breath. "Yeah, it's been going on for years now," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I've been living here for a long time. I own this property, and yet every time I try to do something normal, something mine, the HOA is there, watching, waiting to pounce." The officer didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me, nodding slowly like he understood but didn't quite get it. Maybe he thought it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe he didn't know how deeply petty some of these HOA rules could get. "You know," I said, keeping my eyes locked on his, "it's not about the boat. It's never been about the boat. It's about control. The HOA thinks they own this neighborhood. They think they have a right to decide how we live, how we enjoy our own property. But they've crossed a line. I'm not going to be the one they walk all over anymore." The officer shifted his weight, his hand reaching up to scratch the back of his neck. "I get that," he said slowly. "But I still don't understand why this had to involve the police. I mean, I'm sure we can figure this out without bringing everyone into it." I could see where he was coming from. It was just a boat ride after all. But the thing was, it was never just about that. It was about them thinking they could control everything, even when it wasn't their place. And I couldn't just sit back and let that happen anymore. Just as I was about to speak again, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. I turned to see her, the HOA president, coming back down the driveway, her clipboard in hand, her smile firmly planted back on her face. She was trying to act like everything was normal, but I could see the nervous energy bubbling beneath her calm exterior. She knew she wasn't in control anymore. The officer raised an eyebrow at her. "Got the paperwork?" he asked, his tone skeptical. Her smile tightened. "Yes," she said quickly, though I could tell she was forcing it. "I've got all the documentation right here. This man is in clear violation of our HOA rules. He needs to comply immediately." She handed him the clipboard, her fingers trembling just a little. The officer glanced down at the papers, flipping through them slowly. I could see him scanning the pages, his expression unreadable. I couldn't help but wonder if he was beginning to see just how ridiculous all this was. The rules she was waving around weren't even legal, just HOA guidelines that didn't hold up in court. But I wasn't going to wait for him to figure that out. I needed to take control of the situation, now. "I'm not doing anything illegal," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "I'm launching my boat on my own property. If the HOA doesn't like it, they can talk to me. But you're not going to arrest me for it." The officer finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine. There was a brief flicker of something, maybe doubt, maybe frustration. But then it was gone, replaced by a look of resignation. "I can't arrest you for launching a boat on your own property," he said, his tone softening. "But there's not much I can do here. If the HOA insists on their rules, that's a civil matter, not a criminal one." The president's face turned pale. She didn't seem to like that one bit. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. For the first time I could see the cracks in her armor. She had no backup here. She had no real power. Not anymore. I leaned back in the boat, letting out a long, deep breath. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for so long was finally starting to lift. I had been living in fear of this moment, always thinking they had control over me, always believing that I was just a small part of their system. But I wasn't. I was bigger than that. I had the power to change things. All it took was standing up for myself. "So, what's next?" I asked, looking between the officer and the HOA president. The officer glanced at the president, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't going to play their game anymore. "I think it's clear that this isn't a criminal issue. You're free to go, sir," he said, gesturing at me with a nod. The HOA president's face flushed a deep red. Her lips pressed tightly together. "This isn't over," she said, her voice low and tight with anger. "You'll regret this." I couldn't help but smile. "We'll see," I said. "But I'm done being scared of you." She turned on her heel, storming back to her house, and I felt a sense of victory wash over me. But I wasn't done yet. This wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. As the officer began to walk away, he looked back at me, raising an eyebrow. "You sure about this?" he asked, a slight smirk on his face. I nodded. "I've got a plan," I said, watching the officer leave. Now it was time for me to take back control. Completely. I watched as the officer walked back to his car, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. The sirens that had once seemed so threatening now faded into the background. Distant, and useless. The HOA president had stormed off, and with her went all her pretensions of power. I could feel the weight of the moment settling in. This wasn't just a small victory. This was something much bigger. Something that could change everything. The lake stretched out in front of me, peaceful again, almost mocking how easily the tension had dissolved. But it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. I turned the boat back toward the marina, where it all started. My mind raced, mapping out every move, every possible scenario. The president's empty threats echoed in my mind. "This isn't over," she had said. But what did that even mean anymore? What could she do now? It was clear she had no real power, not when I was holding all the cards. And that's when it hit me. The marina. That was where the real game was. For years, I'd watched as the HOA controlled it. They had every rule in place, everything monitored. It wasn't just about the boat. It was about control, control over the marina, control over the neighborhood, control over me. But no one had ever questioned their power, not until now. I wasn't going to let this slide, not when I had the chance to flip the script entirely. As I docked the boat, I could feel the pulse of something shifting in the air. I wasn't just a guy fighting the HOA anymore. I was a man on a mission, and with every step I took toward the marina office, I could already imagine the shock on her face when she realized what was about to happen. I had a plan, and I wasn't going to wait around for her to try and stop me again. This time, I was going to take over. The marina office was small, tucked away near the edge of the water. Inside, a few employees sat at their desks, typing away on computers, unaware of the storm that was coming. The door creaked open as I stepped inside, and the quiet murmur of conversation came to an abrupt halt. They all looked up, surprised to see me. I don't think they were expecting me, but I wasn't about to waste any time. I walked straight to the counter where one of the employees was sitting. He looked up at me with wide eyes, unsure of what to say. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice shaky. I leaned forward, my hands resting on the counter. "I'm here to take over," I said, letting the words sink in. The room went silent. The employee blinked, clearly not understanding. "What do you mean, take over?" I didn't waste time explaining. I didn't need to. Instead, I pulled out the papers I'd been holding on to, the legal documents I had researched, the ones that gave me the upper hand, the ones that said this marina was, by all rights, mine. "I'm the new owner," I said flatly. "I've got the paperwork right here." He looked at the papers, then back at me. The confusion on his face was almost comical. "But—" He stopped himself, realizing that arguing was pointless. I didn't know you were—" "I'm taking control of this place," I interrupted. "I'm not here to ask for permission. I'm here to make sure the rules are followed the way they should be." The man glanced nervously at his coworkers, none of whom dared speak. I could see the panic in his eyes. This wasn't just about a boat ride anymore. This was about power, and I was about to take it from them. Before he could say anything else, I turned toward the back office. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see the manager's desk, piles of paperwork stacked high, a computer screen glowing faintly in the dim light. I walked toward it, my heart pounding with anticipation. I opened the door without knocking. Inside, the manager was sitting behind his desk, scribbling something on a piece of paper. He looked up, startled to see me. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a little less confident than it should have been. I didn't waste a second. "I'm here to take control of the marina," I said again. "I'm assuming you have the keys to the office." He froze for a moment, blinking at me like he thought this was some kind of joke, but there was no humor in my eyes. I wasn't playing games anymore. The manager shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't know what this is about, but—" I slammed the papers down on his desk, cutting him off. "It's about power," I said coldly. "And right now, I've got it." The manager looked down at the documents, his eyes widening as he started to realize the gravity of the situation. He glanced at the door, as if hoping someone would rush in to stop me, but no one came. No one could stop me. I saw the moment he realized he had no choice. He could either resist and risk losing his job, or he could hand over control without a fight. And when he looked at me, I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew he was out of options. "Fine," he muttered, pushing the keys toward me. "It's all yours." The keys felt heavy in my hand as I took them. A small but satisfying victory. I wasn't just going to sit back and let the HOA call the shots. I was going to make sure they knew I wasn't afraid to take what was mine. I turned around and walked out of the office, the keys jingling in my pocket. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The HOA president had underestimated me, but now it was my turn to show her what real control looked like. As I walked back toward the boat, I couldn't help but think about what was coming next. I had the marina, but there was still so much more to do. The HOA wouldn't let this slide, not for long. But I was ready, and this time, I wouldn't be backing down. The keys to the marina were now in my hand, but they felt heavier than they should have. Each jingle seemed to echo louder than the last, and the realization of what I'd just done began to sink in. I'd taken the marina, sure, but this wasn't about a piece of land or some paperwork. It was about control. And decontrol, as I was learning, was a double-edged sword. I stood at the edge of the dock, staring out over the water as the boat bobbed gently, almost like it was waiting for me. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm orange glow across the lake. It was beautiful, peaceful, yet it felt so damn temporary. The HOA president hadn't given up. I knew that much. She had to be plotting something, trying to figure out how to get her precious Marina back. But she had underestimated me. She had no idea who she was dealing with. This wasn't just about a boat on a lake. This was about everything I had worked for, everything she had tried to take away from me, from all of us. But as much as I knew this victory was mine, I also knew I had to be careful. The HOA wasn't just going to roll over. If I let my guard down now, they'd find a way to take it all back. The last thing I needed was for the president to storm in, demanding I relinquish control, backed by the rest of her loyal board members. I walked back toward the Marina office, the keys weighing heavily in my pocket. When I reached the door, I took a moment to steady myself. This wasn't just some petty act of rebellion. This was my opportunity to turn the tables. It was time to get serious, time to play the long game. I opened the door, and the same employee I'd seen earlier was sitting at the desk, looking up at me nervously. He didn't speak, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew what was happening. He knew I was in charge now. "You're going to need to start treating this place differently," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm in charge here now. We're going to run this Marina the way it should have been run from the beginning." The employee nodded slowly. I could tell he didn't have the courage to argue, but I also saw the uncertainty in his eyes. He was scared, just like I was, just like everyone else who'd ever lived under the HOA's thumb. I wasn't here to make friends, though. I was here to take control, and that was what I was going to do. If anyone had a problem with it, they could leave. If the HOA didn't like the changes, then they'd have to face the consequences. I walked into the back office, shutting the door behind me. The paperwork was piled high, some of it mundane, some of it important. I didn't have time to go through all of it right now. But what I did have time for was the one thing I knew I had to take care of first. The HOA president would come after me. She wouldn't take this lying down, and I needed to be ready. So I got to work. I made a few calls, gathered some legal documents, and started to dig into the finer details of the Marina's operations. There were loopholes, lots of them. Loopholes that the HOA had exploited for years, and now they were going to work for me. It wasn't just about owning the Marina. It was about dismantling everything the HOA had built. It was about stripping them of their power. I didn't know exactly how long I had before they'd come for me, but I knew I needed to act fast. The more time I had to prepare, the more time I had to make sure the HOA had no chance of getting this place back. The hours passed by in a blur. My phone rang a few times, but I didn't pick up. I couldn't afford distractions. This was my time, my moment to take back control of what was rightfully mine. And the more I worked, the more I realized just how much they had taken from me, how much they had taken from all of us. I was no longer just a guy fighting for his rights. I was a man on a mission, and nothing was going to stand in my way. But even as I sat there surrounded by stacks of paperwork and the sounds of the Marina, I could feel the weight of the situation. I had won a battle, but I had not yet won the war. The HOA president would be back, and when she came, she'd bring everything she had with her. She'd stop at nothing to regain control, to make sure I didn't succeed. But I wasn't going to make it easy for her. And that's when the door opened again. I turned around to find the employee standing in the doorway, his face pale. "Is something wrong?" I asked, my voice steady, though I could feel a knot forming in my stomach. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously. I think you need to see this," he said, holding up a letter. I walked over to him and took the letter from his shaking hands. The words were clear, and my stomach dropped as I read through the first few lines. It was from the HOA. They were coming after me, and they were bringing lawyers. The letter was a threat, one that promised a battle that would be long and costly. But I had been expecting this. The HOA wasn't going to back down. They would fight tooth and nail to maintain their power. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't backing down either. I looked at the employee, a small smile creeping onto my face. This is just the beginning, I said. Let's see how badly they want this Marina back. As I turned back to the desk, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a fight for a Marina. It was a fight for everything the HOA had taken, for everything they had tried to control. And now, I was going to make them regret ever crossing me. The letter from the HOA sat on the desk in front of me like a ticking bomb. The words blurred together, but the message was crystal clear. They were not backing down. I had expected this. I'd known it was coming, but now that it was here, the fight was officially on. This wasn't just some petty dispute over boat rights or marina rules anymore. This was war. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, trying to steady my nerves. The HOA president wasn't going to let me take this place without a fight. She had the lawyers, the power, the resources. But she didn't have what I had: determination. The more I thought about it, the more I realized just how much I wanted this. Not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been stepped on by those petty rules. I wasn't just fighting for control of the marina anymore. I was fighting for justice. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of the lawyer I'd been talking to about all this. His name was Greg, a no-nonsense guy who specialized in real estate and HOA disputes. He picked up on the second ring, his voice calm and professional. "Greg," I said, my voice steady. "It's time." "Time for what?" he asked, sounding a little confused. "It's time to turn up the heat. The HOA's sending lawyers after me, but I'm not backing down. I need you to get ready for a fight." I could hear him take a deep breath on the other end. "All right. You sure you want to go this route? They don't play nice." "I don't care how they play," I shot back. "I'm done with them pulling the strings in this neighborhood. Let's show them who's really in charge." There was a pause. I could tell Greg was thinking it through. "Okay, I'll get the paperwork ready. But you need to be prepared for this to get ugly. The HOA doesn't lose easily." "I'm not worried about them," I said, a little more confidently than I felt. "Let's do this." We hung up, and I stared at the letter again. The HOA thought they could intimidate me. They thought they could scare me into giving up. But I wasn't going to back down. They didn't know who they were dealing with. The following days were a blur. Greg worked tirelessly, getting the legal documents together, preparing counter-arguments, and filing motions. I spent my days making sure the marina was running smoothly, ensuring there were no signs of weakness. I wasn't just taking the marina. I was taking everything they had worked so hard to keep hidden: the corruption, the under-the-table deals, the shady operations. I was going to expose it all. Then came the day when I finally saw her again, the HOA president. She didn't come with her usual smug confidence this time. This time she was accompanied by a lawyer, a big-time, well-dressed guy who looked like he had just stepped out of a courtroom drama. The two of them approached the marina with a purpose. She wore that tight, artificial smile she always had, but I could see the panic behind her eyes. She was scared. I watched from my office window as they marched toward the door. I wasn't about to let them walk in here like they owned the place. They had tried that before, and failed. I stood up from my desk and made my way to the front office. When they walked in, I could feel the tension in the air, thick like smoke. The president looked me up and down, as if trying to gauge whether I was going to back down. "So, you've decided to fight dirty, huh?" she said, her voice laced with fake sweetness. "I should have known. You always were a troublemaker." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had the power now. I could feel it coursing through me. She wasn't in charge here anymore. I was. The lawyer stepped forward, his briefcase in hand. "We have some legal matters to discuss," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. "We'll need you to vacate the premises immediately, or we'll be forced to take further legal action." I looked him dead in the eyes. You can take your legal action and shove it. I'm not going anywhere. This is my marina now. The president opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was too stunned, too caught off guard by my response. For once, the power had shifted. She was the one on the defensive now. I'm sure your lawyer has a lot of threats prepared, I continued, my voice low and steady. But here's the thing. If you want this marina back, you'll have to go through me. And I don't think you're ready for that. She blinked, clearly taken aback. Her lawyer seemed to sense that he wasn't going to get anywhere with me. This isn't over, he said, his voice gritting with frustration. We'll see you in court. Fine, I said with a shrug. But be warned. This time, it's you who's going to lose. With that, they turned and left, the door slamming behind them. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle over me. It felt good. It felt like I had taken control of something bigger than just this marina. But even as I relished the moment, I knew the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The HOA was relentless, and they would fight me every step of the way. But now, I wasn't the one running scared. They were. I leaned back in my chair, looking out over the marina. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was my territory, and I wasn't giving it up. I started going over my next steps, making sure I was ready for the court battle ahead. It was going to be brutal, but I was ready. I wasn't just going to win, I was going to bury them. But then a thought crossed my mind. What if they didn't just want the marina back? What if this whole thing was about something bigger? Maybe the HOA wasn't just playing for control of a few acres of land. Maybe they were playing for control of something else. Something far more dangerous. As I sat there, thinking about what was coming next, I couldn't help but wonder, what's the real reason the HOA president is so despy? Right to get this marina back? What's she hiding? I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play here. Something more than just a battle over a marina. It wasn't just the fact that the HOA president was willing to go to such extreme lengths to take back control. It was the way she'd shown up with that lawyer. The way her eyes darted nervously when I mentioned the marina's financial records. There was more to this story. I knew it. And now, it was time to find out exactly what they were hiding. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the piles of documents scattered across the desk. I had been poring over every single file, every piece of paper I could get my hands on. I had the marina's operation records, the lease agreements, and even the older HOA meeting minutes. And that's when it hit me. The pattern. The HOA wasn't just using the marina to control the neighborhood. They were using it to launder money. I froze. My fingers hovered over the documents. The last thing I expected was for this whole ordeal to be about money laundering. But the more I looked at it, the clearer it became. The HOA president had been running a scheme, one that involved overcharging residents for marina usage, taking kickbacks from contractors and funneling those profits right into her pocket. The marina wasn't just a power play. It was a cash cow, and now I had the evidence to prove it. I couldn't sit still anymore. I had to act, fast. I grabbed my phone and called Greg. I could hear the confusion in his voice when he picked up. "What's up?" he asked. "I've got it," I said, barely able to keep the excitement from my voice. "The HOA president's been laundering money through the marina. I've got the proof." There was a long silence on the other end. "Wait a second. Are you serious?" "I'm dead serious," I replied. "I've got records that show exactly how they've been overcharging people and skimming profits off the top. This is bigger than anything we thought." Greg let out a low whistle. "Well, this changes everything. We need to move fast before they can cover it up. You ready for this?" "I've been ready for months," I said, my voice hard with determination. "Let's expose them." I hung up and began making preparations. I wasn't just going to fight them in court, I was going to destroy their credibility. I had everything I needed to bring down the HOA's entire operation. But this wasn't just about taking down the president. No, this was about the system she had built. The lies, the manipulation, the greed that had been running unchecked for far too long. It was time to take them all down. I printed out everything, every document, every email, every shady deal they had made. I wasn't going to just give this to Greg. I was going straight to the media. It was time for the world to know what the HOA had been up to. I knew it was risky, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was no other choice. I wasn't going to let the HOA win. I wasn't going to let them sweep this under the rug like they had done so many times before. This was my chance to make sure they never got away with it again. I made a few more calls, setting up meetings with reporters and legal experts. It wasn't going to be easy, but if the HOA president thought she could intimidate me, she was in for a rude awakening. I had the upper hand now, and it felt damn good. The following morning, I stood outside the local courthouse, a folder full of evidence in my hand. I had already made arrangements to meet with a reporter who had a reputation for exposing corruption. I wasn't just going to play defense anymore. I was going on offense. The media was going to tear through the HOA's defenses, and once the story broke, there would be no going back for them. As I waited for the reporter to arrive, I couldn't help but think about everything that had led me to this point. The boat ride, the threats, the legal battles, it had all led to this. I had fought for what was mine, and now I was going to make sure that no one else had to suffer under the HOA's grip again. The reporter arrived a few minutes later, a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense attitude. He shook my hand and immediately got down to business. "All right," he said, his eyes scanning the folder in my hands. "I'm going to need everything you've got. And once we go public with this, there's no turning back." "I'm not turning back," I replied. "Let's bring them down." We spent the next hour going through the evidence, and as the reporter scribbled down notes and made calls to his editor, I could feel the weight of everything I had been fighting for. The media was going to expose the HOA for what it was, a corrupt, power-hungry organization that thought it could control everyone. But now the truth was out. By the time we were done, I had a feeling that everything was about to change. The HOA president would no longer be in charge. The Marina would be mine, and the neighborhood would no longer live in fear of the petty rules that had held them hostage for so long. As the reporter walked away, I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. This wasn't just a victory for me. This was a victory for everyone who had ever been oppressed by the HOA. I had turned the tables, and now it was their turn to face the consequences. But as I stood there, feeling the wind on my face and the weight of the moment, one question kept nagging at the back of my mind. What happens when you finally take down someone who thought they were untouchable? When the tables turn so dramatically that they can't even see it coming? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, because the fallout from this is going to be even bigger than I ever imagined.